Hello and good evening. Welcome to In Focus. Syria has entered a new chapter after HTS seized Damascus, marking the end of decades of rule under Bashar al-Assad's government and raising critical questions about the country's future. Meanwhile, tensions on the Korean peninsula are escalating as South Korea faces political turmoil and North Korea ramps up its military activities. And in Gaza, intensified diplomatic efforts by the US, Israel and Qatar aim to end the violence and address the worsening humanitarian crisis. But let's begin by exploring the political transformations in Syria following Assad's departure. According to a recent New York Times headline, which says the fall of al-Assad quickly infuses Europe's debate over asylum, the collapse of Assad's regime has ignited political discourse across Europe about the future of Syrian refugees. While some see this as an opportunity for repatriation, many Syrians who have spent years integrating into European societies are voicing their concerns about premature discussions of returning to an uncertain Syria. This debate highlights the broader implications of Assad's fall, not just for Syria, but for nations far beyond its borders. And to unpack these developments, we are joined by Dr. Osama Ruslan, a researcher in international relations, joining us from Cairo. Thank you for being here on Qnews. Doctor, what would you say are the immediate implications of the HTS takeover of Damascus on Syria's political landscape?
Well, thank you for having me. There are many, of course. We're talking about ramifications and reverberations that are almost I would say they are not confined to the Syrian territories. They go beyond, much beyond, not only to the region, but also to the whole world. What happened in Syria and what is still unfolding actually has unlimited ramifications, not only in Syria, as I said. For example, we have seen European countries putting asylum applications from Syrians on hold. They're putting them on hold until further notice. This decision, of course, is taken by some European countries since last Monday, by the way. And, of course, this follows the seizure of the Syrian capital, Damascus, by armed rebels. So after 13 years of civil war, with countless applications by Syrians who have already arrived in those European countries, that decision is taken. Here, we need to remember that according to the European Union, there are tens of thousands of open claims and asylum seeker applications under consideration in those European countries. So the decision affects the rapidly changing political situation in Syria and reveals the effects of having right-wing parties in power across Europe, because they all share that same political background of restricting or doubling down on immigration. In fact, Syria is still a conflict zone according to international law, and the Geneva Conventions provide explicitly for non-refoulement. And let me explain what's meant by this. Non-refoulement is an international law term that means the act of forcing a refugee or asylum seeker to return to a country or to a territory where he or she, of course, is likely to face persecution. Like you said in the very beginning, Syria is still a land of uncertainty, with still yet to come.
And do you think that these European countries which have decided to halt the claims of people who have been waiting for their asylum claims to be processed, do you think they might just say, okay, you can go home now, everything's fine?
Well, they can say so simply because, again, Syria under international law, or according to international law terms, is still a zone of conflict. So they cannot simply dismiss all those claims and applications as if everything is going or seeing the whole situation in Syria through rose-tainted glasses. This is that would be falling foul of realities and falling foul of their own legal obligations under international law.
Well, France has called for Israel to withdraw from the Golan Heights. Now, this is adding, of course, another layer of complexity to the situation. What does Israel's actions mean for the broader geopolitical dynamics in the region and, of course, especially in that part of Syria?
Well, that means more turmoil across the region. Now, as usual, Israel has not spared a moment and has already proceeded with a military operation in the Syrian territory known as Al-Qneitra, which is a largely destroyed and abandoned capital of the Qneitra governorate in southwestern Syria. What is so special about this area is that it is situated in a high valley in the Golan Heights, at more than 1,000 meters above sea level. So the Israeli military action takes place for the very first time in this region or this territory since 1947. This, of course, violates the disengagement agreement between Israel and Syria. And by the way, let us not forget that the fact that Syria is still or should be treated as a sovereign country under international law. But as we speak, Israel is implementing a military operation to occupy Jabal al-Sheikh, which is also known as Mount Hermon, which is a mountain cluster across the border between Lebanon and Syria. Again, what is so special about this mountainous cluster is that it is 2,814 meters above sea level, which makes it the highest point in Syria and gives a strategic advantage to the elevating forces, I mean the Israeli forces in this case.
And I know that Netanyahu is talking about them staying throughout the winter. Unfortunately, we've run out of time, Dr. Ruslan, but thank you very much for being there and talking us through the critical developments in Syria, not just for the people in Syria, but of course those Syrians who are living abroad as asylum seekers as well. We'll continue to monitor the situation, of course. Now, as Syria navigates a new political reality, another region faces its own turmoil. Let's turn to the Korean Peninsula now, where escalating tensions and political upheaval are reshaping the landscape. How North Korea responded to South Korea's political turmoil is making headlines as Pyongyang's propagandists took an unusually cautious approach. For days, the regime avoided mocking its southern rival after President Yoon's martial law declaration, a sharp departure from its typical behavior. Analysts, as reported by DW, suggested this silence might reflect Pyongyang's desire to distance itself from South Korea, positioning it as another country, or perhaps to avoid triggering unrest within its own borders. However, North Korea finally broke its silence with a harsh critique, calling Yoon's actions a fascist disaster and fueling regional tensions even further. And to explore this volatile situation, we welcome Ina Tangen, a senior researcher at the Taipei Institute, joining us from Beijing. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Tangen. And we'll start with the situation that's been unfolding over the last few weeks. President Yoon's martial law declaration has sparked widespread protests and even investigations into his administration. So what do you think this signals about the state of South Korean politics?
Presently, it is in chaos. The opposition has asked for his impeachment. It's going long. He has indicated that he is going to fight it. He's trying to make concessions in terms of his government on policy matters, especially the budget. But it's unlikely that he will succeed. He's going to probably join all the rest of all but 3 presidents who have gone to jail over the last 30 years.
and North Korea's response to the turmoil. What do you make of that? It's been called measured but critical. How do you interpret Pyongyang's response?
Well, Pyongyang is just simply, they're delighted. I mean, this is great PR fodder for their people. They can point to the South Koreans and say that it's completely corrupt. And that it's, this is what happens when you have an enemy country that is uncooperative and threatening to you. So from them, it's a PR point of triumph.
And recent missile tests by North Korea are further escalating tensions, as they always seem to do. What are the implications of these military advancements?
Well, you'll remember last January, they indicated that they were never intended to merge with South Korea and that they would be an enemy forever. Actually, what it means is that Kim would like to normalize his country by settling its boundaries, allowing him to get rid of the sanctions in his mind and become a normalized country. Something that he can pass down to his children. It's very clear he's trying to get people to pay attention to North Korea, but with Ukraine and also with Gaza happening and Lebanon and Syria, things like this, it's very hard for him to get attention. So it's going to wait. We'll see what Donald Trump thinks of all of this stuff.
Well, yes, coming to that, how do you see the role of external powers like China, but also, of course, as you mentioned, the incoming Donald Trump administration? How might that mitigate or even exacerbate the tensions on the peninsula?
Well, Donald Trump is interested in getting more money from the South Koreans. He's already indicated he's going to up the ante. He did it last time. He wants them to pay more. In fact, he wants them to pay even more than the cost of having the troops there. He wants them to pay for U.S. protection. It's doubtful that Kim will meet with him again. He felt humiliated by Trump. He felt Trump really offered nothing and kind of made a fool out of him. You'll note that Donald Trump hasn't shown any love letters from the young Kim. In terms of China and Russia, the situation is actually better for North Korea because they're now are not solely reliant on China. There's always been a certain amount of distrust, especially by the North Koreans towards China. They always feel that China somehow wants to take them over. I think if you look at the realities, the last thing that China wants to do is take over North Korea. But they are interested in having a buffer between them and having, U.S. troops going eyeball to eyeball with Chinese troops. So having Russia there is a kind of a pressure relief valve for North Korea. They now have another nation where there's a land border where they can trade, and that has similar enemies to them. I think they're expecting that Russia will support them in any kind of peace initiative if it ever comes to that.
And you talk about Donald Trump almost running a protection racket for South Korea, and there's of course those love letters that you mentioned also. The relationship between Kim and Trump went from insults to love letters. Could it change just as quickly next time around?
I doubt it. I mean, Donald Trump really isn't concerned about North Korea. It already has the nuclear weapons. He can't say that he's going to prevent them from having nuclear weapons. They're already there. It's just not his main concern. He views foreign policy as simply leverage points, kind of chips in a game where he wants to reestablish American, make America great again, basically by bringing what he thinks reindustrializing the U.S. I don't think anybody really thinks that that is possible, but it is something that is at the forefront of his mind. And as you can see in the past, he's not really concerned about ideology. He's concerned about making a deal.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Tangen, for joining us on the program and for giving us your expert analysis on the situation on the Korean Peninsula. Of course, here on Q News, we will continue to watch any developments closely. While the Korean Peninsula grapples with rising tensions, it's the situation in Gaza which remains dire. Diplomatic efforts are underway to bring an end to the violence and alleviate the humanitarian crisis. As the Washington Post highlights in its latest headline, the US diplomats in region push Gaza ceasefire deal and Syrian transition. The Biden administration is racing against time to broker a ceasefire in Gaza while simultaneously working on ensuring a stable transition in Syria post-Assad. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan's comments about coordination with the incoming Trump administration underscore the urgency and bipartisan effort behind these diplomatic moves. This is a pivotal moment for US engagement in the region. And joining us to discuss this issue is Dr. Bassem Abu Samia, a writer and political researcher joining us from Dubai. Doctor, thank you very much for joining us. So how do you assess the recent diplomatic efforts by US representatives and Qatari mediators to try to facilitate a ceasefire in Gaza?
Thank you for hosting me. In fact, we all realize that the Gaza Strip is now made of rubbles and nothing but piles of rubbles. And underneath, there are many people buried because of the continuity of the Israeli bombardment on daily basis, and every day throughout the hours there has been bombardment. This has led to a huge number of casualties, something like 100 people, victims every day. Yet the Prime Minister of Israel, Netanyahu, is showing some readiness for a ceasefire, but yet he emphasized that he is not ready to end the war, and he said he will continue the war anyway. Still, there are a lot of efforts being made in order to materialize some temporary ceasefire. In addition to Qatar and Egypt, Turkey is also on the line of mediation in order to get the approval of Hamas for a ceasefire. And this has urged Blinken to pressure Turkey to push forward towards getting Hamas to agree to a ceasefire. So the talk nowadays is about two agreements. One is a limited agreement that can assure the return of some hostages, and the other one would be a totally new agreement, different from the other ones, in order to restore all the hostages. But still, most of the parties are more focused on the temporary agreement for a ceasefire to stop the military operations and to restore some hostages. It's all about the readiness of the Prime Minister of Israel, Netanyahu, to agree to end this war. Nevertheless, Israel is continuing blocking the humanitarian aid, the medication, and things like that to the Gaza hospitals. And this is something that requires quite a serious position from the different parties in order to force Israel to allow the entry of such materials, because starvation is being used as a weapon.
Of course, you mentioned that the humanitarian crisis in Gaza continues to worsen. What are the key challenges in ensuring immediate relief and also for the long-term recovery of the affected people?
That The key party in pressuring Israel would definitely be the United States. But yet the US did not do much and did not do enough since the beginning of this war to convince Israel to have a better position. That's why the Prime Minister of Israel continues to ignore such demands from the mediators, from the international organizations, from the international community, and from the US. Because the Prime Minister of Israel is trying to hinder any kind of calm in the north of Gaza Strip, and Israel has been working to separate the north of Gaza Strip from the south. And this is basically because Israel is aiming to make the Palestinian issue as a whole nothing but a population problem that can be dealt with through rescue programs and stuff like that. And that's why Israel is not ready to allow the entry of this assistance. And Israel is systematically demolishing the Palestinian way of life. And the number of people killed is unprecedented, something like 45,000 Palestinians killed in this war. And many thousands were buried under the rubble. So this actually calls for a very strict and firm position from the Arab community and from the international community, because the international community did not do the needed position and the needed part in order to stop this war. Because the international community sees people being killed every day and not moving to force Israel to stop the war. This war has been extending and even went to Lebanon and to Syria recently.
And Israel's continued military actions and the high civilian death toll complicate ceasefire efforts. How can international actors effectively pressure both sides to reach an agreement? And of course, you have the situation that Hamas is receiving less support now from Iran. Might that have an effect on the negotiations?
I wish to say that Hamas has received more hits, and it has been subjected to a lot of hits, as well as Hezbollah in Lebanon. And this has great impact on the positions of Hamas, and Hamas now is ready for giving some concessions. But still, the situation is not about Hamas, but the international community should exert more effort and more pressure on Israel. For 415 days of war, Israel never cared about any demands made by the international community or made by the US or made by other Arab parties to end this bloodshed. But still, Israel didn't care. Israel is seeking, especially the Prime Minister of Israel and the right-wing government crew, they wanted to achieve their own objectives by restoring the hostages, and before that, demolishing the military capabilities of Hamas. Without achieving this, the US will not stop supporting Israel, and Israel will not stop the war on Hamas. The way it is also fighting Hezbollah, and the way it is also practically attacking Syria and coming closer to Damascus. It's all about the Prime Minister of Israel, because the Prime Minister of Israel did not care about public opinion, did not care about any of this. There has been a call from Arab League, something like shortly, to condemn this war and to allow some entry of humanitarian aid.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Dr. Abbasami. I'm going to have to stop you there because we are coming to the end of the program, but we thank you for your comprehensive perspective on the diplomatic efforts, and I would like to thank all my guests for joining me on the program today. Now that brings us to the end of today's episode of In Focus. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for more updates here on Q News.